So since this is a part two, I'll do a brief review in case there's anybody new who's joining us, and we'll catch up with where we left off last week. So we started off with the dramatic and surprising introduction, so to speak, of the Bar Kochva letters that occurred in 1960. I'm sorry?
Nothing.
Right, in 1960 at the home of Ben Zvi, the president of Israel. And we learned for the first time in a public forum that the first name of Bar Kochva was actually Shimon, which we didn't know up till that point. Now, we had Bar Kochva coins that seemed to indicate the name could be Shimon. Usually it was just a shin and a mem. But those coins, we didn't even know that they necessarily referred to the person who would come to be known as Bar Kochva. So I'm going to share my screen, assuming that that is enabled. And here we go. And we'll go just quickly through things just to catch up to where we were. All right, can everybody see the screen?
So far, nothing is being shared.
Nothing is being shared. How is that possible? Okay. Hit share.
Yep, now we're out.
All right, there we go. Okay, so this is the introduction to the book Bar Kochva by Yigal Yadin, Israel's preeminent archaeologist of the time, General Yigal Yadin. And the announcement of the Bar Kochva letters. We then went to, as background, the destruction of the Second Temple by Vespasian and his son Titus, and the Judea Capta coin that we had here. And we introduced the idea of a timely kind of relic that was unearthed. And these are coins that give us a pretty good sense of when events happened. If you can find a coin on a floor next to a wall, we know pretty much that creates our event horizon for the archaeology of the time, and the things that are found on the same layer can be dated, therefore, with a high degree of certainty that they belong to the same time period. We talked about the three requests of Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai, Tein li Yavna v'chachameha, right, give me Yavna and her scholars, which is where the Sanhedrin was located to after it left Jerusalem. Preserve the Shushilta, the chain, the family chain of Rabban Gamliel. And number three, Vasfata Demayan Le Rabbi Tzadok, provide a doctor for the healing of Rabbi Tzadok, who'd been fasting in order to prevent the coming destruction of Jerusalem. So we introduced the idea that inherent to the whole story, so to speak, of the Bar Kochva revolt, it seems to be in many ways connected with the Asara Harugei Malchut, the 10 martyrs that we read about on Tisha B'Av and on Yom Kippur, right? And we know that Rabbi Akiva was one of the 10 martyrs, and in fact, in all the lists, Rabbi Akiva appears, even though there are differences with some of the other people who were killed, right? And that his students had some kind of a death. We found ourselves at the time, it was still in the middle of Sfirat HaOmer, and the death of either 12,000 or 12,000 pairs, 24,000 students of Rabbi Akiva, and the emergence, so to speak, sometime during the reign of Hadrian, according to most scholars, of Bar Kochva. From there, we went on, we discussed a number of issues, right? But we said that the name Bar Kochva is based on the pasuk Erenu v'lo atash, Erenu v'lo karov, Darach Kochav mi'Yaakov, Kochav referring to the future Redeemer of Israel, the future Mashiach. V'kam shevet miYisrael u'machatz pa'atei Moav v'karkar kol b'nei Shet. And so, according to Jewish tradition, this pasuk refers to the future Messiah, and that based on this pasuk, Bar Kochva was either given the name or took the name for himself as Kochba, but this doesn't tell us what his actual name was. That was based on, as we know now today, the archaeological work of the emergence of the Bar Kochva letters already 60 years ago. Okay, then we looked at the Rambam, and I'll just read again. Sharei Rabbi Akiva Chacham Gadol Michachmei Mishnah Haya. Right, that Rabbi Akiva was from the greatest sages of his generation, that he was the leading scholar, Stam Mishnah Ke Rabbi Akiva. Right, we have this authoritative stance. That he was the arms bearer for Bar Kochva. One thing we don't know is what the Rambam's source is for making this statement, right? And one of the I would say the limiting factors of the Mishnah Torah in general is that the Rambam doesn't quote, he does not refer to what his sources are pretty regularly, right? This is an ongoing problem. So if there's a pasuk, then we can figure it out where it's coming from. But if he makes a statement like this, we don't necessarily know what the Rambam's source is. And then we moved into the two Gemaras in Yevamot, right? The Bavli that we have today and the Bavli that Rav Shrira Gaon was quoting, right? I think I might have misstated that Rav Shrira Gaon came before the Gemara. That's not correct. Rav Shrira Gaon is writing, but his girsa of the Gemara seems to be earlier than the girsa of what we have in our Vilna Shas of today. So here you can see on the second line, Mipnei Shalom Nahagu, the death of the students of Rabbi Akiva were because they were not noeg kavod zelazeh. They didn't treat each other with respect, and the reason for their death, the cause of their death, was a choking disease called askara. In the Geret of Rabbi Shrira Gaon, right, he writes that nothing about being noeg kavod zelazeh, about treating each other with respect or a lack of that, right? He attributes it to a shamda, right, to a concentrated campaign, a campaign of extermination, right? It's very common for people today to say that the students of Rabbi Akiva participated in the war of Hadrian, but that's not what a shamda is. A shamda is a soldier dies, a soldier, right? It's tragic and it's sad, but that's not a shmad. A shmad means it's some kind of a campaign to destroy these people, and we know during the Hadrianic decrees, right, Rabbi Akiva was arrested, he was put in jail, but strangely enough, he continues to learn from his jail cell with his Talmidim. So that's a little bit odd. All right, next, we dealt with the 5 good emperors of Rome, and we had Nerva and Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, right? Our main focus is on Hadrian, right? Hadrian being Hadrian Shchik Atzamot, as he's referred to in the Gemara, that his bones should be pulverized. So if you're in a history class in the 21st or the 20th century, Hadrian is one of the good emperors of Rome. But this hasn't changed. In the Gemara, Hadrian is still considered to be a bad guy. Now, in a discussion that I had with my partner in Foundation Stone, Barnea, so he pointed out that there seemed to be indications that Hadrian at first gave permission for the rebuilding of the temple. Strong evidence we don't have for that, but it's going to be relevant to what we get to in the new section of what we're going to deal with in a few minutes. All right, here's a bust of Hadrian. His rule following Trajan was from 117 to 138. Maybe 137. The dates are not so clear on any of this. All right. And so how you date things and what you date, right, is still open questions. We don't have clear and definitive answers regarding the dating. Okay. Here we have Dio Cassius. Some people say Cassius Dios, Cassius Dio. I'll just read a quick section from Cassius Dio. Then indeed Hadrian sent against them his best generals. First of these was Julius Severus, who was dispatched from Britain, where he was governor against the Jews. Severus did not venture to attack his opponents in the open at any one point in view of their numbers and their desperation, but by intercepting small groups, thanks to the number of his soldiers and his under-officers, and by depriving them of food and shutting them up, he was able, rather slowly, to be sure, but with comparatively little danger, to crush, exhaust, and exterminate them. Very few of them, in fact, survived. 50 of their most important outposts and 985 of their most famous villages were razed to the ground. This was a big war. All right, I'm adding that. 580,000 men were slain in the various raids and battles, and the number of those that perished by famine, disease, and fire was past finding out. Thus nearly the whole of Judea was made desolate, a result of which the people had had forewarning before the war. For the tomb of Solomon, which the Jews regard as an object of veneration, fell to pieces of itself and collapsed, and many wolves and hyenas rushed howling into their cities. Many Romans, moreover, perished in this war. Therefore, Hadrian, in writing to the Senate, did not employ the opening phrase commonly affected by the emperors, "If you and your children are in health, it is well. I and the legions are in health." So he didn't write that, right? This was considered to be a slow campaign, even by the Romans. This was not a moment of grand combat out on the battlefield. This was a slow campaign to solve a problem once and for all. Okay? They didn't send into the siege cities food. The whole point was to starve the people. They didn't send to their enemies support of any kind, right? This was a campaign for the Romans to once and for all finish the problem of the Jews. Okay? So let's go on. Right? Eusebius writing another 100 years later. He's the bishop of Caesarea. He's representing the Holy Roman Empire. Here's a picture of the Cave of Letters where most of the Bar Kochva material was found. Right? Coins have been found both in Israel, Bar Kochva coins, and in Europe. Right? Wherever Roman soldiers went, they took silver. And so if the coin happened to be stamped, impressed with the campaign of Bar Kochva, then they used that because they didn't care. The important thing was to have the silver in the coin. All right, Jews were careful, especially with the machatziot shekel, to mint coins that preserved the weight of the silver in the coins and not to create alloys, right, of the metals, which would not weigh the correct amount. Right, sifting. Now, just a note on the sifting process. You can see the buckets that are being sifted here on the ground, but today, what's becoming more and more common is what's called wet sifting. With wet sifting, we can find far more material, in particular, earth-encrusted metal objects, coins, nails, pins of various kinds. Right? It's much easier to find them after they've been wet sifted. So even though dry sifting continues in the country, it's not nearly as effective as wet sifting. And you can see the canyon over here of Nachal Chever in the background. Right? Where's the location of Beitar? Beitar is here in our neighborhood, a little bit northwest of Efrat. Right? You can see it on the outcropping to the left of the picture is Yad Kennedy, where you can also see, depending on how dense the foliage and the time of year, right, you can have a pretty good view into the archaeological site, which today is unfortunately under the control of the Palestinian Authority. Okay, another view of Beitar, this time looking down. All right, here's a Bar Kochva letter, also detailing his request for lulavim and etrogim, the arba minim, for the holiday of Sukkot. And here we see the administrative center of the revolt, which was in Herodion. And as I mentioned before, there were many different types of Bar Kochva coins. the vast majority of them featuring elements, articles, items from the Beit HaMikdash. You can see the focus, so to speak, of what we're going to put as the imagery, the iconography of the coins, right? So you see the chatzotzot, you can see a kinor here in this zuz, right? But here, again, is my favorite coin on the left, probably the facade of the Beit HaMikdash with either the shulchan or the aron that you can see in the center with a star on top, which may have been the marking, the logo of the Bar Kochva revolt, that star representing Kochba, the star. On the right side, though, once again, we see the involvement of Rabbi Akiva in the revolt. We can see a lulav, a hadas, a arava, and an etrog, again, because these were also symbols of the temple. All right, now what we're focusing on in this session and last week's session are the three different deaths of Bar Kochva, right? And that seems a little bit crazy to talk about different deaths for the same person. So we talked about Bar Kochva meeting his denouement, his death, right? The first was that Hadrian is quoted as saying in the Medrash, God killed him, right? The Kuti brings Hadrian to the body and he sees the snake coiled around his neck. And so his death is a divine kind of a death as far as the Romans were concerned. And the Medrash says no human being, he quotes Hadrian as saying no human being could have killed this man. So even in his time, it would seem he had this kind of patina, this aura of being, a divinely inspired demigod type of person. In another Medrash, in Midrashim, he's referred to as having died in battle. And then finally, the Sanhedrin puts him to death. We have him being given a test that the Mashiach or the kings of Israel have to be able to smell a lie, right? And so he fails that test. And then the Sanhedrin, and I'm going to say it a little funny now, right, has an excuse to kill him, right? So we need to explain these three deaths of Rabbi Akiva, of Bar Kochva. Okay, and so we know that in the late 16th century, early 17th century, there was a rabbi who was a Talmud, a student of the Ramah and a student of the Maharal, right? Rabbi David Gantz. He writes the first what's considered to be modern history that kind of synthesizes, it combines secular history, or let's call church history, right, together with Jewish history and tries to line them up. He provides both Hebrew dates, right, according to the Seder Olam Rabbah, and he provides dates that are based on the Gregorian calendar. I think it's the Gregorian calendar at that point, right? And he's the first person that tries to align up both of these calendars. From our point of view today, we understand that there's a discrepancy that goes back to the time of the first temple period, but even earlier, of about 168 years, but that's a topic for another time. Okay, so he writes a book called Tzemach David, and it's published in the early 17th century, and in it, he details this period of time. Now, there are some scholars and some books. Bruce, you had a Bar Kochva book, I remember, in English. The name of the author escapes me, but maybe you remember. But the book mentions that there were three kings in the Bar Kochva line. And,
The others resonate.
right. So Rabbi Lesnick, he writes about this. He doesn't talk, to the best of my memory, he doesn't talk about their identities, which is something that he's going to mention here. And there's some other details that are extremely important. So you can see here in the picture, and I skipped it. Here we go. The grave of Rav David Gantz. In the back, just behind it on the right side of the picture, you can see the dates. And it's a modern sign, but he's a very well-known character at that time, and his book was very popular. Also, today we have a much broader view, and there are many more people who choose to use history. You can go on the internet and find dozens of not dozens, right, but on Bar Kochva alone, many videos that talk about him. I haven't heard one of them. I listened to all of them because I'm a little bit obsessed with the topic, but I've never heard anybody mention Reb David Gantz. So what we'll do now is we'll read a little bit from Reb David Gantz and see if we can make a little bit more sense. Reb David Gantz is a little bit like Rav Shrira Gaon. He's considered to be a very reliable source. And so since he's considered to be a reliable source, you would think that more people would quote him. I don't know what the reason is why he's not quoted. Okay, so if you look at the top right-hand corner, Ben Koziva, Hanikra Bar Kochva, right? Ben Koziva. Now, I explained last week that Koziva and Kochva are both nicknames. They don't appear, either one of those do not appear in any of the Bar Kochva letters. Kochva is written either with an aleph at the end or a hey at the end. It's written with a vav or without a vav, right? And it's written with a zayin. I'm sorry, with a shin or with a sin, but never with a zayin and never with a yud, right? Hanikra Bar Kochva. Marad b'Romeim v'asat atzmo Mashiach. He rebelled against the Romans and he made himself into the Mashiach. V'alkei nikra Bar Kochva. And as a result, he was given the nickname Bar Kochva. Reb David Gantz has that part right. That wasn't his actual name, right? But he knows the name that's quoted in the Gemara. He knows the name that's quoted in Medrash Eicha and other places, which is Ben Koziva. Koziva was the name that Chazal knew him by. Now, why there should be a shibush, why there should be confusion as to his identity, we're going to get to as part of this discussion. Because he was Doresh, and he said on himself, right? Ne'amar darach kochav miYaakov v'chulei, the Rabbi Akiva atzmo, and Rabbi Akiva himself, kasher ra'ahu, when he saw him, amar alav hainu malka mashiach. This guy's the real deal, right? He is the Melech Mashiach. Kideita be'eicha rabata b'pasuk b'la Hashem. Just like it appears quoted in Eicha Rabbah. Va'Yehudim asher beBeitar mashchu v'katruhu aleim l'melech. And the Jews who were living in Beitar. Now, we didn't discuss very much Beitar last week, right? Beitar, at this time, right, the Midrashim discuss as having 300, I think is the number that's most often quoted, 300 schools for children, and each one had no less than 300 Talmidim. Now, again, I don't know if this is a guzma or not, but the point is to say that Jewish life was rife. It was filled with Jewish schools, with Jewish children learning Torah, right? And later on, one of the other Midrashim talk about the numbers of tefillin and the skulls of the many thousands of children that were smashed on the rocks of Beitar, the killing of the children in broad numbers. So this was a populated city. Now, the archaeology that we've done in Beitar, going back over 100 years, right, including mapping it out and the topographical research, right, the archaeology and the topography indicates it was a big city, but it wasn't a particularly well-built city. And so very often what we see in cities where both Jews and Romans lived, and we have many of those cities, the quality of the construction, the masonry, right, the construction of the walls, right, was done very finely. In Beitar, it doesn't seem that there was any population of Romans, and the quality of the workmanship is poorer. Right? It doesn't come to the same level. Now, one of the things that affect the archaeology is the shtamrut, is the preservation of the archaeology. So the weather hasn't been kind. But despite the weather, which is a factor in terms of 1,800 years of history that we know about before Beitar was destroyed, how much older is it? We don't know. Right? We haven't done proper archaeological excavations of Beitar. There have been attempts. We were one of the groups that attempted to dig in Beitar. It didn't happen. were mostly for political reasons. We had money, we had governmental support, right? There was all kinds of very powerful people, Aryeh Dulchin and Shimon Peres and Menachem Begin, all supported re-excavating or doing a more modern excavation of Beitar. It didn't happen. Okay, so along comes Bar Kochva. How long was that the center of his campaign? We don't know. We don't know, right? It could have been a short time. It could have been a long time. What the sources will claim, we'll see this in a second, is that either 2.5 or 3.5 was the Roman siege of Beitar, but it had to have been built some time before that. So if the siege itself took 2.5 years to defeat them, right, it must be, right, that the walls were good enough, right, and functional enough to hold off an immediate Roman invasion and destruction of Beitar. The Romans weren't willing to do that, right? There were ways to defeat walled cities, right? But the most effective and guaranteed way was by having good lines to supply your siege. And we can see the siege camps, right, in Beitar, below Beitar, right? If you follow the train tracks a little bit past the Beitar train station, which was in use up until 1948, maybe even a little bit beyond that. It was the first stop on the train line to Tel Aviv coming out of Jerusalem. Okay, so they crown him as king, and he is porek. He removes the Roman yoke, me'al tzavaram, right, that has been placed on their shoulders, on their necks. V'asu hereg rav b'Romeim u'b'Yevanim. He does, Bar Kochva does a massive campaign of destruction and death against the Romans and the Greeks. Now, it happens to be that Hadrian, right, is very Greek in his orientation. He's enamored of the Greek philosophers. He studies Greek poetry, right? He's Greek. Not all the Roman emperors were Greek in their orientation, but Hadrian happens to be, right? Hadrian considers himself, and it's fairly common in the Roman Empire of the time, right, to adopt Greek practices, right, to think of yourself culturally in the Socratic, in the Philo, in the higher intellectual paths of the Greeks that came before the Romans. Not all the Roman emperors were like that, but okay, Hadrian was, right, and so Bar Kochva attacks them, the Romans and the Greeks, Asher Ba'Afrika. Well, that's pretty far afield, right? Well, if you consider Egypt, Africa, it's not so far afield, right? There are campaigns throughout Jewish history, right? During the Hashmonai period and in other periods, right? We are at war with the Greeks. Okay, but here specifically the Greeks who are in Africa, Am Gadol V'Rav, a very large and great group of people, Kechol Asher al Sfat Hayam, like the sands on the banks of the sea, Asher lo yisaper, they're beyond count. V'chein asu b'Mitzrayim, Gam Toshavei Alexandria shel Mitzrayim, Hargu Gam Heim B'Romeim. And so in this outpost where Alexandria may be the most cosmopolitan city of the time, but in Alexandria of Egypt, there are also rising up people, Jews and non-Jews. Gam heim b'Romaim l'divrei Baal Maor Einayim, Perek Yud Bet, Yoter mi'ma'atayim elef ish. So in addition to however many Romans they killed inside Israel, right, in Alexandria of Egypt, they killed over 200,000 people. Vayudim asher be'tzipori, right? Now, here it's the editor of this sefer, I don't know who that is, right, changes the name to Tziporen. Where that is, right, it's unlikely that it's Tzipori in the north of Israel, but another place called Tzifrin, right? I'm not sure exactly how to read this. Hargu gam heim kol goyim. They killed all the non-Jews. Now, it happens to be that in Tzipori, we know there were Romans, right? Pagans and Jews all living together. So they killed there, Gamhem Kol Hagoyim, Ad Bilti Hishir Lahem Sarid, till none were left. Now, this is a much bigger war than we generally learn about when we were children, right? Going to Jewish day school. This sounds like a regional war, which we know in terms of the Kitos War and other campaigns against the Romans, and maybe that's what he's describing here, is the Kitos War, because we don't have a date here. It's not clear what the dates are. All right, Ad Shekesar Trajanus. And so that leads me to believe that this is in the period just before Bar Kochva. It's in the period of Trajan. And he's thinking of it and looking at this period as one war, because we've shifted from Hadrian now to an earlier period of Trajanus. Trajanus is Trajan, right? So he shalach aleim et sartzvo ben achoto and Adrianos, right? That he is sending the general of his campaign, the son of his sister, his nephew Hadrian. V'asabahem hereg rav asher lo nishma'a v'lo nirata lo bimei Nevuzradan v'lo bimei Titus. And they did all kinds of terrible destruction and killing that was not seen in the days of Nevuzradan, right, or not in the days of Titus. The Kfar Hefligu Razal, our sages are already divided, right, over Beperek HaNizikin, right, Me'ahereg Rav HaNaaseh Ba'etahi. And there's all kinds of debates over the great destruction, like the death that occurred, right, at this time. But Amram HaKol Kol Yaakov Zaspasianos, because they said, what's the Kol Yaakov, right, that it's referring to? That's the time of Vespasian. That's Churban Bayis Sheni, right? Kesar, Shaharag B'krach Beitar, but now it's really weird. Who killed in Beitar? So either this is an event we don't know about, right? Or, right, he got it confused. It could be either one, because we don't know how old Beitar, and we don't know if Beitar was one of the cities that was attacked. It's just outside Jerusalem, on the way to the biblical zoo. It's on the outskirts of today's Jerusalem, right? So what is he referring to? We don't know what this is. It's either an anachronism, right? Something out of its historical period of time, or there was a campaign against Beitar at that time. So at that time, 400,000, Arba Ma'ot Ribu, right? The Omrila Arbat Alafim Ribu, and some people say even more. Arbat Alaf, 4,000, 100,000. I don't know what that means, right? Maybe, but maybe it's 10 times. Maybe that's what he's saying, right? The number were killed. Afal Pi Shel Churban Beit Alefachot Nun Bet Shana Achar Churban. So Nun Bet is 52 years after the Churban, the destruction of Beitar. So this sounds like it's a little bit off. There's something not lining up here. But 52 years after the Churban, even if you take the year 68 as the year of the Churban, or 70, you're only up to 122. You're in Hadrian, but that's not 132, 135. Right? Yeah, Bruce, go ahead.
Yeah, don't we know that there's a war in the entire Mediterranean? Throughout the region, I think they dated 117 to 119. Lucius is that they just wipe out Jews throughout the entire...
No, it's earlier. I have to look up what's given as the dates, but that's considered, Lucius is considered earlier, if I'm not mistaken. Okay? Sorry? Yeah, but in other words, that's listed as one of the causes of the war. Right? Now we're dealing with the end period, right? So how do you explain this? Right? If historians today are saying 132 to 135, they're clearly, right, misquoting, right, what's quoted as the siege by Hadrian on Beitar. Because you can't go, that's not the framing of the historians. The frame is that it's a much longer campaign. So you have to account for something, right? If I'm laying siege at each and every walled city, and there's at least 50 of those, and then I've got to lay siege, and Jews have been digging tunnels and adding to the tunnels that already exist. This is a long campaign and a drawn-out campaign. It doesn't make sense to say that all took place over 2.5 or 3.5 years. All right, let's go on. So big numbers. Chazal quote, right? The Medrash that we talked about this last week, about cutting off the fingers of his soldiers until the Chachamim came and said, how long are you going to make Balei Mum out of the soldiers of Israel? And then they have to be able to uproot a tree, and he's got 200,000 soldiers like this. So that's 400,000 of battle-tested soldiers, so to speak. All right. Mikol makom etzino b'mekomot rabot שהמלאכים והקיסרים, that the kings of Rome and the Caesars of Rome, nikru b'shmam al shem ha'kesar kodem. It's very normal. By the way, it wasn't just in the Roman world, right? Also, it happened in Persia, which is why we have such a problem identifying the kings and who is Achashverosh. Is it Xerxes? Is it Artaxerxes? Is it Cambyses? And because they all contain, if you look in the kings lists, right, of Persia, the names are included. And so very similar kinds of naming conventions, right, that the adopted sons most frequently, and sometimes the literal sons or nephews, right, and sometimes complete unknowns, right, who assumed the throne, right, in Rome, in ancient Rome. If the Senate voted in the new emperor, right, they were given, as part of their long list of names, the names of the previous emperor, if there was some kind of connection. So this is very normal. Shema Kesar Kodem, right, of the name of the previous emperor, Kamoshit Ba'er Zebechelak Hashani B'Mekomot Rabot. And just like he's going to explain later on in his Sefer. The Yerushalmi, the Tainid, right, the Gemara in Tainus, right, and Ubemedrash Eicha, Ubemedrash Eicha Rabata, right, Edrash Eicha Rabba, right. So we quote the pasuk Bala Hashem, right, Timsa Churban Beitar v'Maaseh ben Koziva Gam b'Breshit Rabba Parshat Toldot. We have references to the destruction of Beitar. Now, I just want to emphasize, the destruction of Beitar alone is a big event in the history of the Jewish people. When we say the bracha of Tova HaMeitiv, it's the commemoration of the destruction of Beitar. When we, right, are listing the 5 bad events, the 5 events that happened on Tisha B'Av, right, after the Churban Beit HaMikdash, the next thing that's mentioned is Churban Beitar, not the war, not the revolt. It's the destruction of Beitar as a singular event. That means that the destruction of Beitar was profound. All right, we tend to think it was part of a battle. It was part of, right, and there was a lot of death and there was a lot of destruction. Okay, I accept that. But that Beitar itself should have such a profound influence on what we do to this day, that's astonishing. Right? So, Timsa Churban Beitar v'Maaseh ben Koziva Gam b'Breshit Rabbah Parshat Toldot. You can find references to all of this. Ubekabbalat Haravid, Uve Yuchasin, right, in Sefer Yuchasin, Daf Lamed Bet, right, Lamed Hey v'Kaf Mem Bet, Uve Sefer Meor Einayim Perek Yud Bet. We have all these references, but they're all oblique. The references themselves are snippets. They're snatches of history, right? I need to be able to have the kinds of tools and the kinds of resources and the kinds of archaeology to flesh out the whole of this story. Okay, so we have, right, if just let me go a little bit further here and then we'll stop for questions. B'zman Maaseh ben Koziva v'Churban Beitar, yesh bo deot shonot lefi dat haravid hayat chilat malchut ben Koziva b'yemei Kesar Domitian, right? This is how you write in Hebrew, right? Domitian is another brother, the younger brother of Titus. Domitian rules before Trajan. He's much earlier. So he's saying that the battle started much earlier than we give it credence for. Shehu haya achiv shel Titus b'shnat nun bet. He was the brother 52 years after the Churban in the year 122. He took over. But that doesn't work out either, because we credit Trajan as being in power in 122. I'm sorry, Hadrian taking over in 117. So how does that work out? So it could be all the dates are messed up. Could be some of the dates are correct. It could be none of the dates are correct. I don't know, but there's a lot of confusing information here, and maybe this is the reason why Rav David Gans is not considered to be a reliable source here, because it's very confusing. What dates are we dealing with, right? So Bishnat Nun Bet L'Churban Habayit, right? For 52 years following the destruction. But that gets me to 122. But that's not Domitian time. That is either Trajan but not so good, but probably Hadrian. So how do we work that out? The Katav Shakoziva Zeh Meit B'Malchuto. It says that this Koziva, this Melech Bar Kochva, right, died during his kingship, while he was king. Whoa. Right? Well, maybe that's Bar Kochva that we said the story was he died in battle. Or maybe it's the one who died by the Beit Din. B'no Rufus, his son, we're now getting a name. Rufus. Was that the Roman name or is that the Jewish name? Malach Tachtav. He ruled under him. The Acharav Malach ben Beno afterwards ruled his grandson, Romulus. Those are the Roman names. I asked Professor Demsky, what's Romulus in Hebrew? He said, it's Reuven. His name was Reuven. I said, how do you know? Because Romulus is always the way the Romans call Reuvens. Okay, Romulus and Remus is the founding of Rome. Asher gam hu nikra b'shem zikno Koziva. They were all called Koziva. They all were great. Now, again, I translate Koziva as disappointments, letdowns, right? Very often it's translated as liars. I don't think, at least the Koziva that we know, was intentionally lying. I don't think Rabbi Akiva, right, would have taken a person who was an intentional liar and fooled all the Chachamim, or at least the vast majority of them, into thinking that this liar was the Mashiach. He did the things that Mashiach was supposed to do. He fought against the Romans. And in the first stage of those wars, he was victorious. And he started to rebuild the Beit HaMikdash. I can't prove that, but I believe that. Because you don't mint coins when you're not a power of some kind. Not hiding out in caves. You're not minting coins. It's the symbols of the Beit HaMikdash. That's what we're proud of. We're bringing this all back. That's what we're going to put on our coins. That's the evidence. Year 1, year 2, year 3, and a few year 4s. That was the duration of how long they had control over Yerushalayim. It's not like the years that are mentioned on the coins from the destruction of the Second Temple. It's not the years of the revolt. Years of the revolt, remember, there's a siege around Jerusalem. It's only at the end that Jerusalem falls. That's the capital. You can mint coins. You're sitting inside your walled city. By the time the siege of Beitar takes place, the whole country has been pacified. The Romans are in control everywhere, including in Jerusalem, especially in Yehuda. And the war has spread throughout the country. It's even in the Galil. How much in the Galil? We're just starting to find out. And we're finding tunnels and caves where the Jews were living at the time of Bar Kochva. Yunon Shiftiel is an archaeologist, Professor Yunon Shiftiel. He's exploring. He believes there's no question anymore. The Mered Bar Kochva spread to the Galil. Okay, if that's the case, he's telling you something that makes much more sense, Reb David Gans. There were 3 kings in the Malchut of Bar Kochva. It was a real Malchut. And now we have to ask the question. I'm gonna pause here and then we're gonna do questions. Right? We have to ask, how come we don't know about any of this? How come the Chazal didn't discuss this? How come the Christians don't know about any of it? And how come the Romans weren't bragging about it? So let's start with the Romans. This was an embarrassment for the Romans. War is glorious. Meeting people on the battlefield is glorious. So it's so bad that the normal greeting, which we saw from Dio Cassius about writing to the Senate about how the war is going, he's not talking about that. I and the soldiers are fine, right? The campaign's going great. Nothing like that, but that's the norm in Rome. You send out between 1/3 and 1/2 of all the Roman legions. Aren't you going to celebrate that? No, because we're not fighting a glorious war. We're fighting an insurgency, right? Which is threatening the empire. And we're not fighting it on the battlefield. We're fighting it with starvation. What glory for any soldier is there in that? How do I rise to the upper echelons of the Roman army if I'm fighting a war in that way? I can't. So this is an embarrassing chapter. So the Roman historians limit what they say. Now, our source, Dio Cassius, is a Roman. But Eusebius and Jerome and the other Roman who all come later, right? They are church elders. And that brings us to why the Christians didn't join Bar Kochva's campaign. They didn't want to write about it either. What? How are we going to join the war? Now, Chazal say that he turned to the Christians, to the Minim. He turned to the Christians, Bar Kochva, and said, join the campaign. We can't join the campaign. Your guy for the Mashiach is the wrong guy. We have our guy. We can't support Bar Kochva. That would undermine the foundations of Christianity to join the battle, right, for the Messiah. We're not going to write about it. Or whatever we write about is going to be very limited and it may be corrupt. So nobody wants to write about this. And for 1,800 years, that's how things... we have snippets, we have snatches of information, we have a little bit... People like Reb David Gantz write about it.
The Parthians, the people in the East you think they might have some... that we might...
I love the question. I don't know of, and maybe you do. It's not my area of interest, all right? What history did the Parthians preserve of their own culture, right? The Romans write about the Parthians, but I don't know what the Parthians write about themselves. Now, it could be there's a whole body of information like that. I've never read a document or heard a reference to Parthian documents, to Parthian historical documents.
Stone on the mountainside.
Yeah, that's not really documented history. Okay, it is a kind of preservation, but again, fairly limited in scope. Okay, so
the South may not have had any kind of illiteracy to record anything.
That's also true, right? It's also true. But one thing we know, and we know it from the Medrash, right, about the children of Israel, they were going to school still during the siege, right? So we have references from all over the place about the preservation, the need to teach the children, right, how big of a town or a village had to be in order to provide a malamed, right? These things are discussed early on, okay? So we know there's an interest, right, by the Jewish people that predates the Bar Kochva War, probably by hundreds and hundreds of years. I don't remember what the date is. I could look it up, okay? But again, the Jewish reason for not documenting this better is, I think, goes back to that issue between Rav Shrira Gaon and the Gemara. They're both writing after the events, right? The Gemara and Yevamos that we quoted earlier. They're both writing later. So I want my students, I want my community to understand, right, to fix themselves. This was because the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva had bad midos. No, lo na'agu kavod zeh lezeh. They didn't treat each other with respect. So they deserved it on some metaphysical level. Never heard of such a thing. That we're going to have a wholesale destruction of the future generations of Torah learning, right? Because people didn't give each other enough respect. That teaches us how important respect is. It rings hollow. We don't have anything like that. even the reasons for the Churban itself, right, are not so mundane. Sinas chinam sounds so much, right, that is pervasive in your society, sounds far more devastating than that the Talmidim of did. They didn't say kvod harav, they just said harav. I'm making it up. I don't know what the breach was. We don't have sources. But I think there was an intention, a desire by the time that the Gemara in Yevamos was written down, right? It was written down originally like Rabbi Shrira Gaon had it. And then at some point in the future, we don't know when, one of the editors of the Bavli Yevamot changed the girsa, because that's not what Rav Shrira Gaon is quoting. He had a different girsa where he talks about a shmad. And it fits in better. It fits in better. The Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva, I'm banning the learning of Torah. I'm banning Shabbos. I'm banning circumcision, which are some of the issues that are listed as the cause for the war, right? I'm now, if you can't learn Torah in public, right, I'm now going to go after the people who are teaching Torah. That's the Talmidim of Rabbi Akiva. They're throughout the country. Yeah, but they had some kind of disease, askara, that they all contracted. Did they contract it as a contagion? The country is under Roman siege. So how does that happen? People are not moving around easily, right? People are barely coming up from underground, right, in these tunnel systems that they have. So how does that work? So you know what? I'm going to call him Reb Yid. Reb Yid comes along 100 years later, 500 years later, we don't know. And they're typesetting they're writing out the Bavli, and this guy writes, you know what? I have a different thing to say. We want to ignore this. And I think part of the motivation, and again, this is me just supposing, I don't know for sure, is we want to downplay the disaster that was the Bar Kochva revolt. The mistake that Rabbi Akiva made, right? Because Rabbi Akiva did what Chazal tells us we're supposed to do. Okay, is this guy suitable to be Mashiach? What are the simanim? He's suitable to be Mashiach. So we're going to downplay it. It's not, did he start rebuilding the third Beis HaMikdash? Well, that's a colossal disaster. Whatever he built, whatever they started doing, maybe the Korban Pesach, maybe they made the Mizbeach. Who knows what they did? They started doing things. They were collecting money, and the whole thing crashes and burns. So we don't want people to become depressed, chas v'shalom, think that the third Beis HaMikdash came and went, and now it's going to be with Am Yisrael. We have this tradition, and there's no Beis HaMikdash coming down from Shemaim. So what, Rabbi Akiva was wrong? We don't want to go there. We don't want to go there. Rabbi Akiva was wrong. Who wants to say Rabbi Akiva was wrong? I don't like the words coming out of my mouth saying that. But they mistook Bar Kochva for the Mashiach. And they went to war and they followed him, and it failed, ultimately. That's a frightening idea. So what do we do with that? We keep digging. That's the answer. We keep learning. We keep plugging away. And are there any other questions? Bruce, you're done?
Just that there are parts of Jewish people today that after the leader dies, they don't get off the idea about the Mashiach, very interestingly.
So maybe we can do this at another time. I believe it's because of this primarily, and secondarily because of Shabtai Tzvi, right, that the Jewish people in the West, in Europe, made a decision they're not going to be Messianic anymore. We'll stay away from this issue, which is what scared most of rabbinic Judaism in the modern age about Chabad. We can't have people talking like this. We can't have, it doesn't matter how much good Chabad may do in the world, right? They think their Rebbe is Mashiach. I mean, there's a source, I don't remember where it is. Someone quoted it to me.
Or how central the idea is in Judaism. You know, when we had a first temple, for example, is there an idea of the messianic figure? It seems to be only when we're in great sorrows that there's an idea of a savior, a messianic saving us.
No, because remember the Rambam. Ein ben yemot Mashiach el shibud malchios bilvad. Okay, so whether if you take his position or the miraculous nature of other sources for the Mashiach, right? The bottom line is nothing changes as far as the Rambam is concerned between our world and the Messianic age. Wouldn't that be nice if the Umot Olam said we're makabel sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach? It's not such a big undertaking. It really isn't.
Is it a late idea, obviously by the Rambam's time, is that we need a Mashiach personality. But in the days when we're sitting in Israel, Shoftim, Malachim, is there such an idea?
So you see that our understanding of that pasuk in Bamidbar, right? Darach Kochav Mi'akov, right, was always framed as being a reference to Mashiach. I don't know anybody who argues on that. Sorry?
The scepter doesn't leave. It refers to a king, the leader of the Jewish people.
Yeah, that's all Mashiach is. But certain things have to happen attendant to that. But Mashiach is not a supernatural character as far as the Rambam is concerned. Right? That's a Christian idea. And it's a later Christian idea. It's not even right from the founding of Christianity. Right? Only by the mid 4th century do Christians consider him to be, divine. That's not what informed Christianity for the first 400 years of, 330 years, whatever it is, till the Council of Nicaea. But anyhow, I think it's a compelling story. I think it's an important story. And to me, it's part of the subtitle for the Torah, which is warts and all. This is a problematic period. All right? And I think it's healthier to discuss the ramifications of it than it is to pretend it didn't happen. All right? Which I happen to think is true about our Torah in general. All right? But we wait till people are mature enough for certain ideas. So we don't teach Maseches Nida, right, to day school kids. Right? It's not appropriate. There's too many attendant issues that go along with it. And there are other things, right, in the Torah that we wait till they're age appropriate. Okay? So that's a maturity thing. Sometimes you'll meet a person who at a younger age is capable of learning and understanding certain things. And sometimes even a person who's 50, 60 years old can't treat things with the seriousness that they require. You and I both have a neighbor. We know he needs things very black and white. Right? When you have Shivim Panim LaTorah, when things are multifaceted, right? There's different ways of looking at the same thing, and each one will swear that what they're really touching, right, is parts of other animals and not an elephant. Right? So one blind guy says the tail is a snake, and another guy says, right, that the leg is a tree. But they're all touching an elephant. It's the same thing, but they'll swear that I was holding on to a tail, to a snake and a tree trunk and whatever else it happens to be. Okay, that's human beings. That's the nature. Yeah, Izzy Kosover, do you have a question? Your mic is off.
Izzy, if you have a question, you're muted. No, I don't.
Oh, okay. I saw that. All right, very good. Have a Shabbat Shalom, everybody. It was a pleasure. All right, Kol Tuv.
Guys, tonight, 8:45, we're going to be at Dr. Rodan. Russia and politics. You ready? Okay.